Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by our friends at Trailtopia. Thanks for coming back, and I'm particularly excited about today's show because for once I'm quite a bit younger than the person I'm talking to. Our guest today is an extraordinary man. He has lived a full life, much of it devoted to making your and my lives better when we hike. His name is Jim Kern, and suffice it to say, he's done more in his lifetime than about a dozen normal people. When you listen to Jim, you'll be inspired to keep on hiking and getting out into the woods and mountains. He really is one of a kind. He'll be along in a couple of minutes. Before I tell you about the rest of the show, I thought I'd make your mouth water with this. Do you remember those days on the trail when you really need to treat yourself? You know, those days when you fall in the mud or the rain starts running down your neck, the rocks are driving you crazy, or even when you're just fed up. You need a boost, and when that happens, stop hiking, take off your pack, and treat yourself to one of Trailtopia's scrumptious desserts. Why not go for Rocky Road pudding? A rich chocolate pudding loaded with mini marshmallows and toasted slivered almonds. By the time you get that into your system, you'll be warm, toasty and satisfied. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. Now, back to the show. Along with Jim, we've got the wonderful Dr. Lynn Savino, unfortunately for the last time for about a month. Lynn asked if I minded if she took a break, and as I pay her exactly zip, it didn't seem to be an unreasonable request. Lynn will be back in the new year. Today, she's signing off with some really good information about Lyme disease. Make sure you listen, as this part of the show will ease a lot of minds. We've also got a short clip from our companion podcast, Returning to Katahdin, where Bruce and I discuss whether or not to take a stove on the trail. Last, and hopefully by no means least, I'll be reading Chapter 3 from Earl Schaefer's book about his through hike after the Second World War. Walking with Spring. I hope that you're enjoying this as much as I'm enjoying reading it. The fact that he ran into many of the problems that I did gives me a connection with him that I hadn't really expected. Now, let me introduce you all to the multifaceted Jim Kern. Okay, I'd like to introduce you to one of the more experienced hikers on the hiking scene in America. This is Jim Kern. Hi Jim, how are you?
Just fine, Steve.
Well, I understand that you are more of the vintage variety of hiker. How old precisely are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm vintage, yeah. I'm 83.
Wow. And are you still getting out there on the trail?
Oh, yes. You betcha. I'm going to go to North Carolina between Christmas and New Year's and hike in a place, listen to the sound. It sounds like a place every outdoor person would want to go. The place is called Panthertown Valley.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah.
And what sort of hikes do you do these days at the age of 83?
Well, I have been paying a lot of attention to weight, as you might imagine, and I'm calling on much younger people to find out what's the latest in high-tech lightness. And so I've got a new parka, I've got a new air mattress, I've got a new backpack. And it's amazing the weight that I've been able to shed, and so I'm planning on an overnight also when I go to North Carolina.
Good for you. That is amazing, and funnily enough, the timing of this is pretty apropos because there is recently a guy called Greybeard completed the Appalachian Trail at the age of 82. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, and a younger person can't appreciate this the way I can. This is an extraordinary feat in my mind. When I hear, like Earl Schaefer's last hike, when I hear about these folks, the octogenarian types, hiking long distances, I can hardly comprehend it because I'm in the bush leagues compared to those kind of achievements.
I think you've done your bit. Don't worry about that. He was a really determined guy. Now, All this started for you through the love of wildlife and ultimately photography.
Yes.
What do you prefer? Well, firstly, tell us how that came about, and then what do you prefer, hiking or photography?
Well, it all started when I was 11. You're a Britisher. I bet you're interested in birds. This opener is a birding story, but I was 11 years old. I was playing in the woods near my house, and I saw an unusual bird. And the head of our elementary school was a bird watcher, the principal. Uh-huh. She was a bird watcher, and I thought maybe she could help me, but I also thought I might get some brownie points. So I went to see Miss Scott, and she got out this big book, and we identified it as a rose-breasted grosbeak, and that began an interest in birding. And then I went from there to scouting and all the scouting merit badges, and from then on, I was just interested in the outdoors. And I've had a interest in almost all aspects except hunting and fishing. It's more like a passive interest in identifying wildflowers and in hiking and in canoeing, and it just went on and on. But the more important and more interesting to me tends to surface over time, and that's what happened to hiking. I got really interested in hiking.
So hiking is kind of your thing. And you know what's sad about the story you just told us? That you, as an 11-year-old, was out in the woods. That just kind of doesn't happen to a lot of people these days at that age. Maybe fear of the outdoors for some people. But yeah, it's an amazing thing to have learned. And you must have learned a lot from your adventures over all these years. What do you think hiking has given you the most of all?
Peace of mind.
Oh.
I think, and you know, science is in the process these days of confirming what I'm about to tell you, and that is that quiet in the woods has something very special to offer us. Yeah. And if you think about it, Steve, why not? I mean, the genus Homo was around for 2 million years, and the species Homo sapiens has been around for 200,000 years. We should be at home in the woods. This is where we lived all these years, and so it's not surprising that we go to the woods and find peace. We're familiar to it, even if we're urbanites and think we're not. It's in our DNA.
Oh, totally.
And so we're learning. I mean, I've seen a couple of scientific paragraphs about the peace of mind that can come on a person who takes the time to just take a walk in the woods.
Well, funnily enough, you say that, and while you were saying that, I was thinking back to my journey, and I know that we slack-packed, which I know is anathema to some people. We slack-packed my group for some of the 100-mile wilderness. And I remember after 3 nights staying in a bed and breakfast, or a hostel rather, we got back in the woods on that 4th night, and we both sat there, took me and my friend Lydnot, we sat there eating our dinner and sitting on a log, listening to the nuthatches, and we both looked at each other, and it was an unspoken thing at first, and then we both confirmed, isn't it just great to be back in the woods? It really was a magical moment. We both felt it very, very strongly. Uh-huh. Now, let's talk about your extensive involvement with hiking over the years. And I know that you hold quite a few positions of seniority, but they're positions within organisations that you actually started, as I understand it. Tell us a few of the organisations that you've started.
Well, once again, like that birding story, I know exactly where it all began. I was on a vacation in North Carolina with my parents and my younger brother, and he's 10 years younger. And in a day or two, I got bored. And so I said to Rich, hey, would you be interested in a hike on the Appalachian Trail? Because it goes through the Smoky Mountains, and we were close by. Well, I just knew the name. I didn't know anything about it. But, you know, he was ready to follow his older brother. So we took an overnight. This is for experienced hikers. They're going to be smiling at this. We started at Clingman's Dome with the intention of hiking to Fontana Dam, going south, in just an overnight. And we bought some canned goods, rolled them up in blankets we took off the bed of the motel, slung them over our shoulders like a bandolier, and left Clingman's Dome. Well, it was a miserable hike. I won't get into the details, but the clouds condense on the leaves, and the leaves drip water on you. And we walked for hours through this, and we were getting wetter and wetter, and we had no place to stay. We had to pass, if we had any dream of getting to Fontana Dam on time, where our parents were to meet us, we had to keep going. So we passed a shelter, and we knew when we did it, we couldn't get to the next shelter before dark, and we had no flashlight.
Oh, gosh.
So we laid down on the ground. Don't even remind me. Anyway, the title in my book is the first chapter, A Miserable First Hike. And when it was over, I said to myself, is there a long hiking trail in Florida? I mean, this was my first hike. I'm in North Carolina, and I say, is there a long trail in Florida? And it turned out there weren't. So I went down to Florida, and I founded the Florida Trail and the Florida Trail Association, and I've been active in, that was 66. So I've been actively building trail clubs since, 50 years, over 50 years.
Well, you actually started the Florida Trail in my home state of Florida on my 14th birthday, the 29th of October, 1966. And I know this because I saw it. There's a sign on your Facebook page, and I apologise for the cyber stalking, by the way. There's a sign on your Facebook page, or picture on your Facebook page, which shows you in front of that sign, and the date immediately struck me. So how did that come about, though? You decided you wanted a trail in Florida. So how difficult was it to put together? Because we have all these scenic trails in the US, and some of them are protected and some aren't. What was your attitude towards starting a Florida trail, and how did you think that would fit into the National Scenic Trails?
Well, there was no National Scenic Trail then, because the act that created the National Scenic Trails was passed by Congress in October of '68. So
right.
This is 66.
Yeah, predated it.
And so I wasn't thinking of a National Scenic Trail. I was just thinking of a long trail in Florida. And I thought this would be a winter trail. So it's too hot. Don't go near the Florida Trail in July, for goodness sakes. But November, December, all the way through April, we have wonderful. I mean, this is now. What's the date today? November 20.
November
anyway,
28th.
28th. Okay, our
yeah.
season's just beginning.
Yeah.
I say to everybody who's listening, come to Florida and hike on the Florida Trail. But anyway, I decided the best way to get the word out was to make a long hike through Florida, and maybe the media would pick it up. Maybe they'd find it interesting, and there'd be articles, and people would write in, and that's exactly what happened.
Wow. So what was the response of government towards putting together a trail and trying to keep it protected?
In that time, there was no government involved. This was 100% private idea, private.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean that. I meant in subsequent years how that's developed, because I know some of it is still not completed.
Oh, wait a minute. Steve, let me tell you a good government story.
Go on then.
So after I made this hike, and the Miami Herald did a Sunday supplement on it, and pretty soon we had 70 members. Membership was $1 a year, and we were off and running. And then a guy from Tampa, anybody starting an organization, I have to say, I got an important suggestion. Read your mail. It's amazing what surfaces. And a guy wrote from Tampa, and he said, would you like me to put in this first section of the Florida Trail? Right out of the blue. Fred Mulholland. So I wrote him back and I said, by all means, would you be interested in putting that section in the Ocala National Forest? So he was. And so I went to Ocala and I met a ranger and I said, we'd like to put a hiking trail through Ocala. And they said, with a smirk, well, be our guest. Just help yourself wherever you want to put it.
Knock yourself out, yeah.
Who's going to hike in Florida? So Fred built the first 26 miles of the Florida Trail. We put out a map. Pretty soon people start to wander into the ranger station saying, where's this trail?
Wow.
And they had a little egg on their face. And so they had to come to us and say, where's this trail you're putting in? That's how we started.
Yeah, I'm aware that it isn't complete. And how long is the Florida Trail, and how much is missing?
the proposed alignment is around over 1,300 miles.
Which is a proper trail, isn't it? That's a long way.
Yeah,
that's a long way.
Now, volunteers, no government in the beginning, volunteers have built 1,000 miles of the trail.
Wow.
And here's the problem, Steve. Here's the problem. We've picked all the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And now we're at places where the going is rough. The vast property owner, timber companies and cattle, large ranches and so on, they just don't want us.
Yeah.
Well, imagine building an interstate highway. Near me, I'll pick I-10 from Jacksonville to Los Angeles.
Sure.
Imagine having maybe 20% of that highway missing, where you get off the road and you take back roads to the next stretch. Imagine a railroad. Imagine a gas line, a power line. It wouldn't happen because the government would get involved. They would see the worth of it, and the government would acquire the property. Well, private interests, hikers themselves, are stalling out. I mean, if you want to hike the Florida Trail, and by the way, January 4, 5, and 6, a dozen or 2 dozen hikers will set out, we do this every year, to hike the entire length, but they will spend 300 miles on paved roads just because it's not continuous. And so this form of recreation has a need. It needs to be continuous. Otherwise, it's depreciated in value tremendously. Now, let me give you a statistic. Okay. About 2,500 people will set out on Springer Mountain in the springtime, like you did.
Yep.
About 2,500 to hike with the hope of hiking to Mount Katahdin.
Yeah. Some of them make 30 miles. That's all. If that.
Yeah. Now you've got a continuous right-of-way.
Yep.
Right. That doesn't interest people if you're going to have to go on road walks for 300 miles. We're a 50-year-old hiking idea. The Florida Trail is 51 years old. Yeah. We're going to get about 2 dozen people, not 2,500.
Right.
And that's sad. People want to do this, but they want to hike, so they flock to the Appalachian Trail. And you got a crowd problem coming with.
Absolutely. So,
yeah.
What's the solution to this then? How do you think government could make this better, than make this work better?
I have formed Friends of the Florida Trail to be a squeaky wheel in Florida to make the state government do something about this, and I have formed Hiking Trails for America to do the same thing to Congress. Hikers are too gentle. They're too passive. They just want to go out in the woods and enjoy life. And
sure.
And I don't blame them. I do too. But these trails, to be of real benefit to America, they need to be continuous. And we're going to do something about that. And I hope your listeners will sign on and just help us be a voice.
What's the scope of the problem then? Have you got any statistics you can give us in terms of how much of this needs to be done?
Yeah, if you setting aside the Appalachian Trail, which is secure for posterity and is continuous from end to end. Let's put that aside. Let's talk about the other 10. Those alignments of those other 10, and even the big ones we all know about. I mean, the Pacific Crest Trail has unsecure about 10% of its right-of-way.
Right.
The Continental Divide Trail is missing hundreds of miles. The North Country Trail, hundreds of miles. They're all missing hundreds of miles. All right. That alignment adds up to over 16,000 miles, and we are missing of those, in those 10 trails, from that alignment of over 16,000 miles, we are missing 4,074 miles.
Wow. About 25% of it. Man, That's a lot. That is a lot, isn't it?
Yep.
Dear me.
Yep.
But how...
We hikers shouldn't stand for it, and the trouble is, we're very independent types. I mean, we're not particularly groupie. We're not, look, the Harley Davidson guys, you can get thousands of them together with ease. The NRA, they can get millions of people out taking action, and we're like herding cats. I mean, we just, we gotta get together with a single voice and say, Congress, do something about this.
Do you have a petition started anywhere, or I presume you do somewhere?
If your listeners would go to Hiking Trails for America, hikingtrailsforamerica.org. They'll be able to sign a petition.
Okay, well, that's the first thing I'm going to do straight after this, in fact.
Yeah, and then what we'll be able to do is contact them with... We're planning an event in Washington, by the way, on the Mall next April.
All right.
And we'd be able to write everybody and say, here's... Incidentally, let me back up. Backpacker has provided me with a full page, and I'm using that page to advertise this event on the Mall in April. And so that'll be out in January. And so, I'm hoping that hikers will be proactive and, let us know who you are, because we want to feed you information. We're going to give you, if you give us your address, we're going to tell you exactly who your elected representatives are, what building they're in, what room they're in. And we're going to, you're going to be able very easily to just nag them. Do something about it.
That is a staggering statistic, 25% of it incomplete. And I'm sure the road ahead is going to be tough, because you'd think the government these days is not so much cracking down, but being less conducive to the way in which they're looking at things. And I think it's going to be a tough call. But you're absolutely right. It's only by a lot of people making a lot of noise that changes happen.
Yeah, Steve, we know that. But you know what? This administration, like every administration, comes and goes. We're going to stay on this until the stars align, and then we're going to get it. But we can't. It's going to be too late to get organized then. We're going to organize now. We're going to lay the foundation for this, and when the stars align, we're going to get it done.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put all the links in the show notes. I'm actually also going to put the link, funnily enough, as we were just talking about the Florida Trail, I'm going to put the link into a video I saw that you did about the Florida Trail, and it's some beautiful hiking in there, so I'm definitely going to do that. Now, I'd like to talk to you now about the places where you've hiked over the years, and I know you did your little bit on the AT, and obviously I presume you've done much of the Florida Trail. You've also done the John Muir Trail and the Alps and Nepal. Tell us about the differences in hiking in those different places.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. Florida hiking, let's just start there, is very, very different from hiking anywhere else because it's flat. Yeah. When I go hiking elsewhere, I really do want to get into the mountains. And I wasn't sure, in 1966, I wasn't sure that this would be a popular idea. But you know what? Hiking up and down is something we have in our minds, is what we think that's what a trail has to be. No, a trail doesn't have to be that. A very nice trail can be flat.
I tell you, there are days when I would have begged for a flat trail. Yeah, you're right.
So, but I hiked the Milford Tract in New Zealand, and I've hiked Mount Kinabalu in Borneo, Bhutan.
Wow.
Pakistan, northern Pakistan is one of my very favorite places in the entire world. Hiked to Shimshal, a village with no road to it. Hiked in India and Nepal, and you mentioned the Alps. Goodness, I've hiked in the French Alps a dozen times.
Wow.
And I've hiked a little bit in Slovenia and Germany and Austria, but I speak some French, so I like going back to France, and they've got great huts. They call them refuges, and the meals, as you might imagine, the French dining extends to the refuges. And
nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that
right,
at all.
Choices of wines and hearty meals. It's great.
And how do you cope with altitude these days?
I haven't noticed any difference in age. I was with my grandson hiking in the high Uintas in Utah, and we started our hike. There's a road that goes up to 10,000 feet. We hiked. This odd thing to do. We left the car at 10,000 feet. We actually descended a little bit for the first hour. It was so strange. Normally, you start out hiking uphill,
Yeah, it does feel that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I've learned over the years that. My problem with altitude hasn't changed really that I can detect. But over 12,000 feet, if I spend a night over 12,000 feet, I might get a headache. When I was in Bhutan, in the middle of the day, we passed 17,000 feet. But by that night, we had dropped down below 10,000 feet. So That was
apparently that's the critical thing, isn't it? You can go to those heights, but it's making sure you go down and sleep lower. That seems to be the way forward. That's what we did in Bhutan,
and that was just a few years ago. That was 5 years ago.
Oh dear me, what a life! So, does each new trail give you a fresh perspective on hiking? In other words, does it vary the world over, or is it a case of when you're hiking, or do you feel that no, this is a really different experience in, say, Bhutan to the Alps and so on?
Well, I have my own sense of distinctions. For example, on the Milford Tract in New Zealand, oh man, did I hit it right! It poured rain the night before. I mean, there must have been 3 or 4 or 5 inches. Well, the reason that was so fabulous is because the Milford Tract, in every direction that you look, there were waterfalls. There was water running off the mountains. It was fabulous.
Yeah.
And so the amount of rain is very, very high there. I don't remember. It might be 60 or 70 or maybe even 80 inches a year. So the scenery reflects this, lots of mosses and vines and so on. So I identify those waterfalls and all that moss with New Zealand. But on the other hand, if you hike in the Wind River Range in Wyoming or the high Uintas in Utah in the middle of the summer, each footfall will set off a puff of powder. It's so dry.
Wow.
The powder just comes up off your footsteps, So that's what I identify there. In New England, they aren't joking when they talk about a green tunnel. You know all about that. So,
are they?
What I like about hiking in Montana is that the slopes are steep, and why that's so important is because water doesn't collect, and in the summertime you don't get hordes of mosquitoes because the water is rushing off. Whereas what I don't like about Colorado is there are a lot of upland plateaus, and I don't even want to hike in Colorado until maybe end of July. August is wonderful, September's wonderful, but June, not me. You won't see me there.
Yeah, you know your stuff. You know your stuff about the hiking. So you meet hikers on the trail. Do you get a fresh perspective on hikers with each new trail as well, or on people, in fact?
Well, right away, you can tell. Right away, before the person has actually stopped moving and said hello, you can tell if the person is new to what he or she is doing, or this person's experienced. So that's going to direct the conversation. Uh-huh. If he smells bad, he's been on the trail for weeks.
That's right.
and he's one of you.
always a giveaway. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So in Italy. Here comes this woman up the hill with her child. A special like a special pack, not for her back, but it was on her chest. Uh-huh. She's holding a baby, and so obviously she's a housewife. Her husband was behind with an older child, and so I am. So it's a different experience, and I love the fact that everybody's out there. I mean, you can find. I took my kids on their first overnight backpacking trip when they were 5, and honestly, parents should do that. There's no reason why a 5-year-old cannot hike 3 or 4 miles and have a good sleep. He's going to be more comfortable lying on the ground than you are.
Yeah. Well, one of our guests a couple of weeks ago was from the website ellieontheat.com, which is a couple took their 12-month-old for a full hike of the Appalachian Trail. Obviously,
I saw that.
Didn't walk. Yeah, and they said it was great. But when they got back home, the child didn't know what to do with its toys because its toys had been wandering around the campsite, and that's what it was doing. Which was isn't that an awesome thing?
Story.
Yeah, isn't that an awesome thing? I just loved all that. I really did. It was great.
That's charming. Wonderful.
Yeah. Now I saw a video also you put out about this coffee table book you've done, Trail Reflections, which I guess provides combines your photography with your backpacking. For Trail Reflections, 50 years of hiking and backpacking. How did that come about, or did it seem that 50 years was a good time to put the whole thing together?
No, actually, I stumbled into it.
All right.
You see, I haven't mentioned that the birding and the outdoors, all the outdoor experiences. Before I got out of college, I had decided that I was abandon engineering and try to make a living as a wildlife photographer.
All right. I didn't get that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, then, in no time at all, I could see the cost of a plane ticket compared to $200 a page for color photograph. I could see that it just wasn't going to work for me. And so I had to come up with a career that would enable me to raise a family and also provide me with the backup funds for a business that I was going to treat absolutely like a business, wildlife photography I'm talking about, but who knew how much money I was going to make. So I got interested in brokering tracts of vacant land in Florida. And the reason that was such a good fit, I had no idea how ideal this was going to be, because I turned out just loving land investments. But you starve for months on end, and then when you close a land transaction, your fee is sizable. And so, it's tough saving money. But this way, I get this lump sum in my hands. And I had an understanding wife, and I would kiss her goodbye. And now she went on the first expedition with me. We went to Borneo for 4 months, but after that, she wanted to take care of a child, and so I set off in search of the first color photographs of the Javan rhino, the Komodo dragon, the proboscis monkey, various film projects. I got the first color picture of the most beautiful bird in the Western Hemisphere, called the resplendent quetzal.
Oh, what a great name, the Resplendent.
The Resplendent Quetzal. It's in the rainforests of Central America only. Cool. Only above 3,500 feet, in the mists of the mountains. But anyway, this was what I wanted to do with my life. And then that summer in the Smoky Mountains with my brother, taking that hike and getting interested in hiking, this turned out to be kind of a hobby. But the wildlife photography was a career, and not very profitable, but it was a career. But as the years went by, it shifted, and so that late in life, when I closed the cover on my coffee table book on wildlife photography, it was like I closed a huge chapter in my life, and I turned my focus to hiking.
Oh dear, that's a lovely story. It really is lovely. And I know you've also got Jim Kern Expeditions. What's your involvement with that? Yeah,
well, that feeds into the wildlife photography. The book is The Wildlife Art and Adventures of Jim Kern Photographer. That's a long title to that first book, The Wildlife Art and Adventures of Jim Kern Photographer. Yeah. So I published that in 2008, and then 3 years later, I published, and it dawned on me, so odd. After I closed that book, and I thought, well, I've taken my camera on every hike I've ever taken.
Sure.
What sort of inventory do I have? And I thought about that for a while. I thought, you know what? These trips, these hiking trips that I'd taken, I had actually, for no particular reason, I had written them up. And so, not very perceptive of me. I mean, I had the book lying around here in my office. All I had to do was gather it together, write a few chapters that hadn't been written, and I had a companion. Now they fit together in a sleeve.
How nice!
These two books.
Nice. So, what is hiking? Just to finish up here, what has hiking taught you about life?
That phrase, "Take time to smell the roses" or something.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. The value of that is inestimable. We shouldn't get so swept up in the day-to-day. You think, I don't have time to go off this weekend.
That's right.
You have time. You make time.
Yeah. You actually don't have time not to go, to be fair, do you? You've got to go. People have... If they're deliberating over it at all, make the decision to go. I would always say that.
Yes, you must treat it like a meal, like a night's sleep. It's something you need to do. And so if you look at it that way, you'll make it happen. Yeah. And I'm pleased that my kids have picked up on this. My son went to Africa to go fishing. He just came back yesterday. Now, I hope he got that from me, but it doesn't matter. But anyway, You need to do that. And you can even go out and stand quietly. If you have one huge oak tree in your backyard, just stand under that tree and just stand there for 15, 20 minutes.
Standing in nature, I quite agree. Standing in nature is so much different to standing in your house in air conditioning, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is entirely different. And I don't do it enough myself, I must admit.
Yeah, well, I'm going to start preaching to you, Steve.
But please, no. I like to think I'm not too old to make changes, but you never know. And I'm going to ask you one last question, which is a strange question to be asking a man of 83 who's done tons of stuff all his life. That question is, what's next for you?
Well, I've been looking at maps. I sent an email to a lady in. I read a good book the title is On Trails by a guy named Moore. I think his first name might have been John, and he mentioned at the end of the book that he brought up the subject of the Atlas Mountains in Morocco.
All right.
I got thinking about that, and so I went to Facebook. I found this gal. She's a guide, and I wrote her. And so one thing I might do is go to the Atlas Mountains. The trouble is, I got a little problem because our weather in North Florida. I'm in North Florida, and it's so perfect.
That's right.
My favorite months, February, March, and April. So I've got to decide if I want to leave this idyllic month in North Florida and go to the Atlas Mountains.
Don't put it off, Jim. Don't put it off. You know that's the wrong thing to do. Do not put it off.
So I'm thinking about
Listen to your own advice. Do not put it off. Well, look, It's been an absolute delight to talk with you. And normally I prepare these conversations and I give a heads up to most of the questions. But Jim and I have just had a chat, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us. And I'm inspired by what you said. I'm going to go and sign that petition, and I hope that you achieve what you want to achieve with the Florida Trail and any other things that you do going forward.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a pleasure spending time with you.
I enjoy myself a lot, and I'll speak with you soon, okay?
Okay, good.
All the best. Bye.
Bye-bye.
He's looking at maps of Morocco with a plan to hike in the Atlas Mountains next year. He's flipping 83. Incredible. I told you, though, isn't he an absolute gent? I could have talked with him for hours. He's so knowledgeable. He's also a bit of a revolution, really. I'll be putting a link to Jim's petition that he referred to in our chat in the show notes. Clicking on it will take you directly to the petition, and please make sure you sign it. It's worth the effort. But while you're there, look around the site. It is at hikingtrailsforamerica.org. Jim is so passionate about issues surrounding hiking that it's hard not to get enthusiastic when he talks about organised marches and petitions. He's like a hiking evangelist with such a boyish enthusiasm. When I edit these conversations, I often delete the ums and ers of my guests. I don't bother with mine, along with some of the longer, sometimes unnecessary pauses. However, I left in one of Jim's longer pauses. This was because you could almost hear him considering my question when I asked him what he thought was the best thing he'd got out of hiking. He hesitated and then said that hiking gave him peace of mind. I love that. I'll be lucky to be able to dip into Jim's life experiences. In fact, I love this opportunity every week of finding out why people do what they do, sharing those narrow little paths that define our trails. It is such a privilege. And don't forget, as he said, while the Florida Trail won't give you thousands of feet of elevation, now is a great time to get on it. And if you pass somewhere near me, give me a shout and I'll drive to have a beer with you. Now we move on to DocSpot and Lynn Savino. This week we're talking about Lyme disease, and I think that, having terrified you all over the weeks, Lynn has some pretty good news to share. Let's listen. Okay, we're back with DocSpot and Dr. Lynn. Hi Lynn, how are you?
Good, thanks. How about yourself?
I'm good, and I'm looking forward to this one because this is about Lyme disease, which I know is something that worries a lot of people, but I know that the percentage of people who get it is relatively low. So first of all, can you talk to that? How prevalent is it, and what do you think the chances are of getting it on the trail?
The Appalachian Trail is one of the most widely, that's one of the places that Lyme disease is actually most widely found, because Lyme disease is actually in 10 of the 14 states that are on the Appalachian Trail.
Wow.
However, just because you're going to be hiking out there doesn't mean you're automatically going to catch Lyme disease. As a matter of fact, a surprising statistic that was surprising even for me was less than 2%. The likelihood of developing Lyme disease from a tick bite is actually less than 2%.
Wow. So that's disappointing. That means we can't scare everybody this week then.
But it's always good to be vigilant.
Absolutely, absolutely. So talk to us about it. How's it caused?
It is caused by a spirochete called Borrelia burgdorferi. Big fancy word.
Yeah.
It's not the tick's fault that you get Lyme disease. It's the spirochete's fault. So the tick is the poor middleman that gets blamed for everything. The tick bites an animal that's infected with this spirochete, and then the tick will bite either another animal or a human on the second feeding, and that's when the spirochete is actually transmitted into the second person or the second living being. That's how you get Lyme disease.
How do you know you got it? I mean, what are the symptoms?
The general symptoms are kind of like feeling like you have the flu. You get fever, a headache, you're very tired, you could get joint pains, you can actually have, if it gets bad, you can get heart palpitations.
Oh my gosh.
And then, of course, you get this characteristic rash called erythema migrans, which is, most people in the lay population know it as the bullseye rash.
The bullseye, yeah.
Yep.
It's very noticeable as well, isn't it? It really is.
It is very noticeable, and it's so specific to Lyme disease that if you show up with a bullseye rash, we don't even need to test you with blood. We don't need to do a blood test. We just automatically give you antibiotics.
Is that the only thing that can cause a bullseye rash then?
That's the only thing that can cause a bullseye rash.
Oh, wow,
right.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
So how do you prevent getting it?
So you obviously want to try to prevent the ticks from getting onto you. When you're on the trail, one of the best ways to do it is to actually walk in the center of the trail. And sometimes that's hard because that trail sometimes be very narrow and you're constantly brushing up against things.
It's about a foot wide, a lot of places.
Exactly. Some of the other trails, if people do hiking on other than the Appalachian Trail, if you walk in the center of the trail, your likelihood of having a tick attached to you is much less likely. So that's really important. And then one of the other things is use an insect repellent that has at least 20% of DEET in it, or use permethrin-treated clothing and gear. Insect repellent is really very important. You spray it not only on your skin, but also on your shoes, your hiking boots, your pants, around the waist belt area, because those areas where one part of the clothing meets another, or one part of the clothing meets the body, because that's an area where the tick might be able to try to get in underneath the clothing.
Yeah, well, one night when I was in, I think it was Pennsylvania, I found 5 ticks on me. I check every night, and there were 5 running around in a really unpleasant place. And so I found these 5 ticks. I was a bit concerned about it, and I spoke to a lady nearby, and she said, just spray with this stuff, this off, which had quite a bit of DEET in it, I think. And she said, pretty much from the knees down, all your clothing, and particularly around your shoes. And I never saw another tick after that. It was amazing, absolutely amazing.
It's very effective. 2 things you said. You saw the ticks running around. If the tick is not attached, you can't get Lyme disease. The tick has got to be attached and be actually feeding on you for up to 36 hours before you have a real risk of catching Lyme disease from the tick.
So really, if you find it, within 24 hours, you're probably going to be pretty much safe. Is that right?
Yes, you will.
That's amazing. So, it's attached though. It started to burrow into you. Is that right? And yet you can pull it out, and if you pull it out within, say, a day, within 24 hours, you should be okay.
Yes, that's actually for Lyme disease. There are other tick-borne illnesses that can also be transmitted, which we won't go into here. But that can actually happen in a much quicker manner.
As far as the Lyme disease is concerned, that daily check is really critical, isn't it? It's
very critical, yes.
Yeah, you have to make sure you check everywhere. You say with a mirror, that was never going to work for me, so I tried as far as I could. And I know a lot of the guys have big beards on the trail as well. Do do they ever get themselves buried into there?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They love a hairline because then they can burrow and snuggle up close. So think about all the places in your body that has hair. That's where you want to be particularly careful.
Yeah.
And, people are very social on the trail. If you ask somebody, can you check the back of my neck? Can you check behind my ears? Check behind my knees? I'm sure anybody would be happy to do that.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Probably stop there unless you really know somebody very well.
Yeah, be careful with how you ask some of these people. Yeah, you're right.
I don't know if anybody knows, but there's a Brad Paisley song called "I Want to Check You for Ticks." It's hysterical. So if anybody wants to listen to Brad Paisley, "I Want to Check You for Ticks." All right.
Nice, very nice. And one thing you put in the various notes you've sent me, which are always very helpful to me, which I'd never thought of, and I think it's a great idea. It says, when you're in town doing laundry, the best practice is to throw your clothes in a very hot dryer for about 10 minutes before you actually wash the clothes. This will kill off any attached ticks, and that's because they do jump off of the leaves and the trees and that as you pass onto your clothes, isn't it?
Yep, they jump off onto your clothes. They can jump off onto your skin. But if you can wash your clothes first, but you have to do it in very, very, very hot water, and you actually have to dry it for a longer period of time. For some reason, and I don't know the physiology of it, the ticks die quicker when it's a hot dryer. So, throw it in a hot dryer for 10 minutes on as high a heat as you possibly can, and then wash your clothes and dry them again.
Cool, very cool. So if you're unlucky enough and one's attached, how do you remove it? I mean, I know myself, but I'm asking you, obviously, to explain how it should be correctly removed, because there's a wrong way and a right way, isn't there?
Right. The only right way at this point is to take a pair of fine-tip tweezers that you have in that first aid kit I talked about.
Absolutely.
And grasp the tick as close to the skin's surface as possible. And you gently pull with an upward, steady, even pressure. And this will take a couple of minutes, actually.
Wow.
For the tick is actually going to get tired. Think about somebody hanging off a jungle gym. You're trying to hang, and somebody's trying to pull your legs, and you're holding on and holding on and holding on.
Yeah.
And finally, you're too tired, and you let go. That's exactly what's happening with the tick's mouth. It eventually gets so tired that it lets go. And it's actually very cool when it happens. I've done this in my office, and you'll just feel that release, and poof, it just comes out right in your hand.
Oh, my gosh.
It's great. It's wonderful.
How deep in do they burrow?
Not very deep. It looks deeper than it actually is. Their pincers, their mouth parts are all that needs to go in. So the rest of their body is just hanging out in the breeze there.
Okay, so once you've removed it, you clean the bite area, I presume. And you said with rubbing alcohol, which not everybody has. Is there an alternative to that?
Yeah, soap and water, rubbing alcohol. If you have some of that Purell or
of course, yeah,
the hand sanitizer, that's it has a very high alcohol content.
Right. Just
like you would do any other kind of a wound. It's not. There's nothing different from a tick bite, a tick that's been removed, than any other type of a wound. You clean it just the same way.
Okay, so what does Lyme disease actually look like then? After you've had the tick bite.
So if you get the tick bite and you're one of the less than 2% that actually winds up getting infected, you'll know usually within 3 to 30 days after a tick bite. Again, we talked about the flu-like symptoms: fever, chills, headache, fatigue, joint pains, muscle aches. You might feel...
It could be 30 days?
It can be up to 30 days that you won't find any symptoms. And I tell my patients that if you're worried about a tick bite, but we're not really convinced that you've contracted Lyme disease because maybe, it was only on for 24 hours or so, I said, if you've gone a month and you haven't had any of these symptoms, you're good. You're fine. But you should monitor yourself for at least 30 days. Yeah.
Wow.
Again, the classic bullseye rash. If you see a bullseye rash, you need to get antibiotics. You need to get off the trail, get to an urgent care center, show them your bullseye rash, and they'll give you antibiotics.
So if you miss your deadlines, as it were, and you get the bullseye rash and it's in you for a while, because some people have this as a chronic illness, don't they?
They do, yeah. The later signs and symptoms can be for days to months. You can get continuous headaches, neck stiffness. You can get Lyme arthritis.
Wow.
Well, you have joint pain and swelling, especially in the large joints. Not so much the fingers, but it's more the knees, the shoulders, the elbows. You can get something called Bell's palsy, which looks just like a stroke on the face. You'll have one side of the face that you'll have a drooping eyelid and a drooping mouth. You could have some drooling. You can't feel anything on that side of the face. Oh. And that is, again, a fairly classic symptom for Lyme disease. Again, if we see that here in Connecticut, I practice in Connecticut, so it's very endemic for Lyme disease. If I see somebody come in my office with Bell's palsy, I will certainly draw blood to check for Lyme disease, but I'll put them on antibiotics right away because, that's very pathognomonic for Lyme disease.
Well, Lynn always explains these things so nicely for our show, but she's actually got a little 5-minute talk she's done about Lyme disease and Bell's palsy and so on. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that. So if you want to learn more about Lyme disease, that's going to be great. Now, how do you treat it though? What is the way in which you do treat it when people have it?
Treatment is antibiotics. The most common antibiotic and one of the most effective is the one called doxycycline. And you take that twice a day for about 2 weeks. Yeah. Unless you've got something called Lyme arthritis or carditis, then you treat it for 4 weeks. But that would be up to your doctor to recommend. If you're allergic to doxycycline, or for instance, little children should not take doxycycline if you're about less than 7 years old, then you can take amoxicillin for about the same amount of time.
And there's no real treatment. Once you've got it as a chronic disease, though, there's no real treatment, is there? You just manage your symptoms, don't you?
That's kind of out of my league, but there are Lyme specialists that do treatment for chronic Lyme. There are definitely Lyme specialists out there, and if you feel that you have chronic Lyme, I would recommend to seek a consultation with one of them.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. It's an important thing this year, and I know there seems to be a big uptick in the existence of Lyme or ticks on the trail, but it's a pretty reassuring statistic, isn't it? 2% of people on the trail have got a chance of getting it. So I don't think that people should worry too much about it, and if they take care in the way in which you've described, then they should even make those chances of getting it even better than that, I would think.
Right, exactly.
Now, one thing I'm going to wish Lynn happy Christmas now, because we're not going to see Lynn now till the new year because she decided to take some time off in the podcast. She's obviously too busy. But we are going to do a couple of things in the new year, aren't we, Lynn? And we're going to see you back sometime in early January, aren't we?
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. I've already got some ideas in the coming weeks. But this time of year is really, really very busy for me. So
I entirely understand, and I really appreciate the help. And I've loved doing these. So have a great Christmas.
Yeah, me too. So I'll be excited to come back in January.
That's cool. So I'll speak to you after Christmas. But have a great time in the meantime. All right.
All right. Take care.
Cheers, then. Bye.
Bye.
How about that? Only about 2% of hikers get it. If you'd like a more technical talk about Lyme, no, that was about as technical as I could handle, I'm also adding a link to a very short lecture that Lynn gave on the subject. Additionally, I have a link to the CDC website and its reference to Lyme. I know I've been telling you about my friend Bruce Matson's podcast, Returning to Katahdin, every week, but I thought I'd add a little taster to our show. In this short clip, Bruce and I are talking about whether or not to take a stove on the trail.
Saving weight means a better chance to get to Katahdin. I didn't think there was any way I could get to Katahdin if I had to have cold oatmeal or energy bars every single day, and I couldn't have coffee in the morning or a warm meal at night. So I quickly decided that if some people think there's a weight penalty to a stove, well, I was going to accept that.
I've got to tell you that hot oatmeal every day sucks as well. So for 180 days, so heating it up doesn't really help. The coffee I would certainly miss, but I know more and more people seem to be going without a stove, just literally to save a bit of weight. But that's as you say, it's a personal thing. Oh dear, oatmeal. Wish I'd known about Triltopia back then. Come along every Monday morning and join the two of us as Bruce prepares for his adventure of a lifetime, and when he's on the trail, we're going to be following him there as well. Next week, my guest is a lovely lady, Julie Gayhart, or Jester. Julie is a serial section hiker with some great stories, including something she referred to as I do not recommend, where she recounts stuff that she has done and does not recommend it. Should be fun. Now, Earl Schaefer is well and truly in the Smokies, referencing places we've heard of and even visited. We even hear that famous AT expression, happy trails. I'll see you next week. Chapter 3, Alone with the Sky. Walking by moonlight on top of Old Smoky, up on the grasslands alone with the sky, while down in the deeps of the shadowy valleys, wistful and wild is the whippoorwill cry. Topoko, at an elevation slightly below 2,000 feet in Deal's Gap, is the western gateway to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. A nearby dam across the Little Tennessee River forms Lake Chioa, the backwater extending almost to Fontana Dam. Both are a part of the system built by the Tennessee Valley Authority. The concept of source-to-mouth control of the Tennessee River watershed was originated by Benton Mackay. His chart of the proposed plan hung for more than 20 years in the headquarters of the Forest Service in Washington before the TVA was begun in the 30s, and he spent several years in the actual planning. He had worked under Gifford Pinchot in the planning of national forests during Theodore Roosevelt's term. Elevations on the Great Smoky Ridge are often more than 3 times as high as Deal's Gap and other nearby points. This difference of 3,000 to 4,000 feet between ridgetop and valley floor accounts for the impressive aspect of these magnificent mountains. The sudden upthrust from the Tennessee Valley causes the abundant rainfall, some of the heaviest in the country. Plants grow to enormous size. One of the largest trees ever found in eastern United States was a tulip poplar in the Nantahalas of North Carolina that measured over 20 feet in circumference. Mountain laurel and other shrubs grow to the size of small trees. Before reaching the Smokies, I had imagined them as a fearsome place of rocky crestline, little water, and few trail shelters. Actually, this lofty range is one of the easiest AT sections to hike, even though it's the highest. According to Geo, this is the dominant ridge of the Appalachian Highlands, yet the top is amazingly level and the footing seldom rough. Maintenance is by the Park Service, including a chain of lean-to shelters. The weather was turning cold and windy as I climbed from Deal's Gap, and a brilliant moon was shining when I stopped to sleep. With poncho underneath and the pack to windward, I rolled in the blanket and pulled the gunny sack over my feet. Meanwhile, those ex-Navy guys undoubtedly were sleeping in so-called luxury at Topoko Lodge. I fell asleep to the lullaby of the wind in the trees and the somewhere calling of a whippoorwill. Most people never in all their lives sleep under the open sky and never realise what they are missing. The first tall peak next day was Parsons Bald, elevation 49-48 feet. Beyond were the high meadowlands of Sheep Pen Gap and then the open summit of Gregory Bald, almost a mile high. Near the edge of the timber were Moore Spring and the nearby shelter, built of logs and split shakes. I paused there to cook a belated breakfast. From this peak, a side trail leads down Gregory Ridge to Cades Cove, one of the most historic places in all Appalachia. A few Cherokees still lived there when settlers came. According to a popular legend, the name evolved from Cades Cove. As the wife of the local chief, she was matriarch of the tribal group and therefore symbolic owner of the land. The settlement in Cades Cove remained isolated for nearly 100 years until establishment of the Great Smoky Park. Some of the homesteads and other original structures have been preserved or restored for visitors to see. Some of the descendants of original settlers remain. Construction was mostly of logs, dovetailed together like antique furniture. At least 100 square miles are encircled by the mountains. Trails lead to the high balds where cattle were grazed and crops such as cotton or corn were grown. The weather was perfect during the afternoon, so warm I could have gone barefoot. The blazing sunlight was blistering my nose, but also was burning away the lingering effects of the early struggle through fog and cold rain. My strength was building up from the low ebb of the second week, and my hopes were soaring. Some people suffer from high elevations, but the mile-high level is where I come alive. Flowers were blooming everywhere. Dogwood and other shrubs were plentiful, but the greatest display was on the ground. Sometimes one patch extended for miles, so thick they couldn't be avoided, even on the footpath. Violets, spring beauty, bluet, jack-in-the-pulpit and mayapple were numerous. It is said that more flower species are found in the Smokies than in any other area of the same size on Earth. People usually come when the rhododendron or azaleas are blooming, but the myriad ground flowers in April and May on the far back places are the botanist's delight, and everything is extra large. Once, while resting against a small pine tree, as the tufted branches discouraged a horde of gnats, I noticed a spoon lying in the grass. It was stainless, definitely superior to the one I had bought in Bryson City, so an exchange was made. This is my smoky spoon, which will be gladly surrendered to anyone proving ownership. At Spencefield campsite, one of the highest east of the Rockies, and consisting of a spring and a clump of rhododendron and many acres of grassland on the ridge crest, I paused to cook, then rambled on. A full moon was rising, and Spencefield shelter was only a few miles ahead. Moonlight enhances the majestic solitude of the Great Smokies, softening distant objects into luminous unreality. All was serene, with the cool, thin air a pleasant tonic perfumed by countless wildflowers. Tall, dead grass from the previous year crunched crisply underfoot. The bordering trees were barely beginning to leaf. Only a breath of breeze whispered along the crest that night, and only the brightest stars showed through the sheen of moonlight. My steps were a weary stumble when the roof of the shelter appeared in a high ravine. Shaded from the overhead moon, the interior was black, but the brilliant light revealed extraordinary details out front. Rustic tables were loaded with a variety of canned goods, jars of jam or butter, other jars of fatback or ham, enormous pancakes still in the skillets, and plates of partially eaten food. Was the shelter full of people? Yet there was absolute silence. I struck a match to look. The lean-to was empty. Here was a mystery indeed, but I was already more than half asleep, and morning would be soon enough to solve the puzzle. Even then, by daylight, the place had an eerie look, something like a ghost town. Apparently a party had come for the weekend and then left in the middle of a meal. Cans and other litter were strewn from here to yonder. Amongst the rubble were several empty whiskey bottles, mute evidence of what had caused the exodus. I cleaned up the mess somewhat, then rewarded myself with a liberal breakfast from the abandoned supplies. Next was Thunderhead, tallest peak so far at 55-30 feet. Views were far-reaching over the trail just hiked into the Tennessee Valley westward. Further on, the path followed a narrow crest with views over Tennessee to the left and North Carolina to the right. Then came an aisle of shrubs bearing bell-shaped blossoms. People often complain of encountering rainy weather in the Smokies, of storms that come with little warning, strike with terrific force, and disappear just as suddenly. I wouldn't know. For me it was 4 straight days of sunny time and moonlit nights, a halcyon interlude. The only drawback was the chronic sunburn that resulted. At Siler's board shelter in mid-afternoon, I decided to stop early and catch up with chores. The main project was to cut the blanket to mummy shape and sew on a long zipper that had been filched from the tent. My change of clothing was washed and dried. The pack was checked over and further modified. This was the final shakedown, and no important changes were made during the rest of the hike. As usual, before turning in, I scribbled the day's impressions in the little black notebook. On such a night, it is easy to stare into an ember fire, while thought is free as wind in the trees or water among worn stones. So far, the timber had been mostly hardwood, some of the largest remaining in the United States. The third day brought dense evergreen forests, mostly spruce and fir, known to the mountain people as he-balsam and she-balsam. These trees are tremendous for upland growth, some towering above 100 feet and with base diameters of 2.5 or 3 feet. They stand so close and the canopy is so thick that little sunlight reaches the ground. When an old monarch uproots or breaks off, it is often caught and held partially upright by its neighbours. In such a forest primeval, it is fitting to sing the old mountain song, in the pines, where the sun never shines. The Smoky Park was set aside primarily to preserve such remnants of the mighty forests once growing in this country. The National Park designation has checked exploitation to some extent, but fire is more difficult to control. One area had been completely denuded by a blaze that started far down a steep ravine and burned to the ridge crest, a sight almost as depressing as a battlefield. Such fires usually result from carelessness. A match, a cigarette, a campfire left smouldering, and the restless wind does the rest. The people who start the fires often do not realise what they have done. The same kind of carelessness causes enormous destruction of buildings and loss of life. Clingman's Dome, once known as Smoky Dome, is the highest summit in the Smokies and the highest point on the Appalachian Trail at 66.43 feet. It is the second highest peak east of the Mississippi, the highest being Mount Mitchell, which is about 40 feet higher. On Clingman's Dome I came to the massive log observation tower, since replaced by a modern tower, and climbed topside to get pictures. Another shutterbug was there, and we discussed the views. Then two couples arrived, so well groomed that I muttered about looking so rough. One of the men smiled and said that was how a hiker should look, adding that his store sold the same brand of boots I was wearing. As I left they bid me good luck and happy trails. The heavy stand of fir and spruce that crowns Old Smoky extends all the way through Indian Gap, where the Cherokees cross to the overhill towns in Tennessee to Newfound Gap. The trail winds through this area of ancient trees which still are thriving. All phases of the life cycle are present, from tiny seedlings through the sapling and mature stages to the overaged monarchs that soon will join the great moss-covered ancestrals already mouldering into the forest floor. Newfound Gap is the hub of tourist traffic in the Great Smoky Park. Cars and buses were parked around the traffic circle and people were everywhere. Nearby is a memorial to the Rockefeller family, which donated part of the money to establish the park. Other funds or land donations came from Tennessee and North Carolina. Near the memorial was a large lady wearing a sunsuit and leading a small boy by the hand. She took one look at my brick-red face and blistered nose and laughingly declared, "I like sunshine, but not that good." Somehow she reminded me of the lady that first day in Georgia. After getting as shipshape as possible in the comfort station, I caught a bus for Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Two drivers were aboard, and the sight of me started them talking about bears. They mentioned every instance they could recall of people getting mauled or bitten. When told that I carried no gun, one said he reckoned the best policy was to run anyhow. Actually, bears can be very dangerous in the park because they are half tame and not afraid of people. Because of the early season, I hadn't seen any. In Gatlinburg, I dashed across the road from the bus station to Charlie Ogle's store, a combination of supermarket, sporting goods store and general store. The sign said, "We sell everything." A bus in the opposite direction was due in a few minutes, so I bought some groceries in a hurry and didn't linger in this shopper's paradise. This bus driver was interested in snakes, and he had plenty of time to elaborate while ascending the winding road, including the loop where the highway crosses itself. He described fatal and near-fatal encounters with rattlesnakes and assured me they could really strike their entire length. He too regretted my lack of a gun. As I was leaving the bus at Newfound Gap, he drawled, "Well, take it slow and easy now, buddy." The other passengers looked very sympathetic. On the North Carolina side of the park is Qualla Indian Reservation, home of the eastern band of Cherokees. These are descendants of tribesmen who managed to escape the Trail of Tears and hide in the Smoky Wilderness. They bought the land through a white agent, then had it taken from them again before it was finally established as a reservation. One of the Cherokee leaders was Sequoyah, inventor of the Indian alphabet. He was a leader in the attempt to have the Blue Ridge Loop become the state of Cherokee, a plan that enraged land-hungry settlers. Tribal hero is Junaluska, who gave himself up to be shot so that his people might remain in the Smokies. A few miles east of the Newfound Gap is Charlie's Bunyan, an appalling place. Years ago a forest fire burned the area to the bare rocks. The trail follows a narrow ledge with a long sheer drop below. The view westward is spectacular. The view downward is horrifying. This section, known as the Sawteeth Range, has a crest so narrow that the footway is sometimes buttressed with rocks. At nightfall, I was between shelters and decided to push on to Hughes Ridge by moonlight. While moving along, sometimes in the open, other times through hardwood forests where the moon cast intricate shadows upon the forest floor, I thought of my old-time buddy, lost in the war. Part of a letter he wrote when we were in different parts of the Pacific came back in vivid retrospect. Remember the shadows we cast on water twixt sunset and sunrise, like panning for gold or something lost. But we do walk on the same trails of thought. Was he walking with me now, in spirit? Because of freezing temperatures that night at Hughes Ridge, I bedded down in front of the fireplace and kept a warming fire. The trick is in being able to wake at the right times during the night to replenish the fire. It's also prudent to keep water handy in case of flying sparks. A better idea is to carry a warmer bedroll in the first place. Squirrels were barking and chipmunks scurrying in the morning. The trail led on through dense evergreen forest, the trees tall and slender in the reach for sunlight. The path was gullied by heavy rains, and logs had been placed to divert water flow. Occasionally, a vista would open westward to spacious farmlands in Tennessee. At Tri-Corner Knob Lean-To, one of the best in the park and with one of the coldest and sweetest springs, a sign had been fastened to the crossbeam by District Ranger Ralph Shaver, urging hikers to keep the area neat and to be careful with fire. The trail route skirts the summit of Mount Guyot, second highest peak in the park, and the side trail was obscure and obstructed by fallen trees. Like Clingman's Dome, this peak does not have an open summit. At Camel Hump Mountain, the trail turns abruptly over a ledge, opening a vista towards Mount Sterling on the right. 3 pictures were taken here, each one distinctive. One was through a blooming salvis tree toward the Big Pigeon Valley, and another was of the trail turning left along the steep slope buttressed with rocks. From there, the path turned downward gradually, then steeply down a ravine, and finally through a backyard and along a walk to the road in Davenport Gap. My tryst with Old Smoky was over, but the memories live on. Nowhere else on the Appalachian Trail do I feel so strong an urge to return.